It's fascinated me for a long time. But we're going to go more into some more detail around sort of gut health and implications of it as well. So, Dr. Megan Rossi and Alice Glover, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having us, Jimmy.
Fantastic. So, just give us a bit of insight into why gut health is so important.
Yeah, Jimmy, I think a lot of people are hearing gut health in the headlines, but they don't necessarily realise, I guess, the full power and potential of the gut health, and that's because the science has really only recently evolved. So gut health isn't just about digestive symptoms. What we're discovering is that in our gut, so this 9-metre long tube that delivers food from entry to exit actually lives trillions of gut bacteria. And it's these gut bacteria that are doing so many things for their body in terms of communicating with our brain, communicating with our appetite hormones, impacting things like our heart health, our skin health. It really is a game-changing area.
It's really interesting, and I suppose for me, sort of the interest in sort of this area came about a while ago from a mental health perspective, and it's probably outside the scope of our conversation today, but I found that really interesting in terms of the sort of gut-brain link and so on and so forth. But sort of bringing it back to the scope of this sort of conversation you sort of touched on why it is important, and sort of going in a bit deeper. For our listeners who aren't familiar with this, can you sort of emphasise maybe why it's important to be aware of it and the implications of sort of having a healthy gut?
Well, Jimmy, as you were discussing around this kind of two-way connection between our gut and our brain, these are the sorts of things we're finding out in clinical research trials, that nourishing your gut through the right nutrition, so adding in plenty of different types of plants, can actually have these far-reaching benefits on things like your mental health. So it certainly isn't off-topic at all. In fact, that's one of the key focuses of the Holland and Barrett campaign. It's to think proactively about your gut health. So not just thinking, oh, I've got a digestive symptom, therefore I need to think, how do I look after my gut? But actually, everyone should start to be focusing on their gut health because of this, landmark scientific discovery that's showing that treating our gut microbes with plenty of care, so things like adding different types of plants to it, de-stressing, sleeping well, actually can, lead to very measurable impacts on things like, other elements of reducing our disease risk.
Yeah, and that's really interesting stuff. And I suppose, for our listeners, I'm sure some may be aware, may not be aware, but certainly in my journey, anecdotally, for me, when I looked at improving my gut health, it was a bit of a minefield out there in terms of trying to find information out there. And sort of going on what you said there, I certainly noticed the difference. I found that, a plan that works for me eating-wise, and I know, like around Christmas time, for example, I just sort of like let myself go. I feel my mood, might be placebo, I don't know, but completely changes. If I sort of increase the volume, my own experience, I sort of cut sugar and increase plant intake, and without going into the details, what works for me might not work for somebody else. But I suppose for people listening, what are some steps they can take to make improvements?
Yeah, so I think something that you can do straight away is looking at the diversity of your diet. So how many different types of foods are you eating every day? Are you sticking to the same kinds of foods? Are you snacking on the same types of thing? We've introduced something at H&B in terms of plant point labelling. So we've actually looked at how many different types of plants are included within a product. So we've got an 8-plant pasta sauce, for example, which has got 8 different types of plant in it. Little things you can do. So, for example, if you're having porridge for breakfast, try adding in some mixed seeds, some cinnamon, topping with different types of berries with some banana, and there you've already got 6 or 7 plant points as opposed to just 1 if you were just going to have porridge. If you're buying apples, maybe buy apples and pears, have different types, try and include as much as you can, especially with spices and things like that. If you're making kind of curries or stews, throw in as many different spices and herbs as you can. All of these kind of count towards that weekly total that we're going for, which is around 30, which is kind of what the preliminary research is showing has got evidence to support a healthy microbiome.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. Sort of, there, and I suppose everyone's got their own sort of experience of what they do. And in terms of people taking sort of, what could be sort of one step that, if someone's sort of in the beginning of their journey, is there one step they can make to kind of, if anyone, like from my experience when I sort of first began, it was a minefield out there trying to find evidence-based stuff as well, and good sources as well. It wasn't always easy. Now it's sort of come a long way since then. But is there sort of one key step maybe people can sort of make to move forward in that sort of direction?
Yeah, look, I think one of the key things, as you've been highlighting, is finding your gut thing, right? So everyone's gut's slightly different. So it's thinking about one small change that you can make. So perhaps it's adding an extra plant, to your diet. So if you normally have your porridge for breakfast, it might be adding, some frozen mixed berries on it, and you get 3 extra plant points there. If you're having takeaway for dinner, it might be as simple as literally adding a can of mixed beans to it. You get another 3 plant points there. So adding plants into your diet wherever you can. Or perhaps it's not necessarily about diet for you. It might be looking kind of to tap into this two-way connection that occurs between your gut and your brain. So de-stressing your brain. So, 5 minutes of belly breathing can help relax that two-way communication between your gut and your brain. Or, simple things like, eating, chewing your food. It sounds very simple, but actually chewing your food at least 20 times can actually increase the amount of nutrients your body absorbs from that food instead of it going to waste. So there's many different, very simple hacks you can kind of implement. It's about choosing the one that kind of works best for you.
No, that's really really informative. That Dr. Megan, that's I think good place for people to start. That's for sure. To sort of contemplating that. I mean, just out of interest, I know there's no two people the same. I'm no expert in this field by any stretch of the imagination. My sense is obviously everyone's different genetically as well. What might respond to one person different, but are there certain types of food you think that are quite useful for gut health? I mean, like for inflammation as well. Is there anything sort of? And this is not suggesting this is advice for anyone. They've got to obviously find their own path, be it professionally, whatever. But are there sort of generally some foods that are accepted to be quite good for the gut?
Yeah, so we chatted about the different plants out there, but it's also some animal foods, so things like oily fish if you do eat animal foods, fermented dairy also are thought to be really beneficial for the gut. And when I talk about plants, I'm not just talking about things like your fruit and veg, it's also your whole grains, so things like your oats and your quinoa, your nuts and seeds also count, and your herbs and your spices, as well as those legumes, so things like your chickpeas and your butter beans. So thinking about each one as its kind of own individual kind of like powerhouse of nutrients. So instead of it just being like, oh, I'm just going to have this superfood like a blueberry, the science actually is suggesting there's no such thing as just a single superfood. Each different food actually has its own profile of kind of powerful nutrients that can really nourish the gut. So moving away from that individual superfood to thinking about, that diversity, that plant diversity is probably the best way to achieve good gut health for everyone.
No, that's really interesting, and I my own experience, I keep reflecting back on that. I brought sort of, I went vegetarian, but I brought sort of salmon. I try and get like wild caught salmon, back in the diet, and sort of kefir, is it kefir? I don't know how to pronounce it now, but I try, that as well seems to work. So I guess the idea is that sort of, obviously there's no substitute for sort of, seeing someone professionally sort of qualified in that respect, but I suppose sometimes it is maybe a case of sometimes you try something if it works for you, if it doesn't as well. Is that sort of fair enough as well, do you think, as long as obviously sort of the food's not not going to affect the person? But is it or sometimes a case of maybe I tried flax seeds, that didn't really work for me, but for some people it's great. Is that sort of a case, do you think people maybe sort of could be a trial process as well?
Yeah, I think certainly. I think when it comes to our microbiome, it's almost like a fingerprint. It's very individual. I think we've all got completely different compositions in our microbiome, and what might work for one person might, actually trigger symptoms in others. But I think from the evidence, we know that there are, established dietary patterns that can contribute to supporting a healthy gut. So, for example, following a Mediterranean-style diet has been shown to help support the gut. And also, you mentioned about kind of inflammation earlier. These are kind of well-established dietary patterns and ways of eating, but they're not prescriptive. So, a Mediterranean diet isn't you must eat these foods. It's actually these dietary patterns have been shown to confer a benefit. So I think certainly not saying you must eat this food. And I think exactly what Megan said, there is no such thing as superfoods, only super diets. You could have the worst diet in the world and eat blueberries and it's not really gonna change anything. But actually having a really sound, nutritionally dense dietary pattern is going to be, sound advice for everybody.
Absolutely. And just on that note, where can people find out more information? I think I'll have a look myself, to be fair. It's quite interesting, really. But is there any way you can sort of signpost people to find out some more information?
Yeah, of course. So if you go onto the Holland & Barrett Health Hub, which is our kind of content platform, there's hundreds of articles there, not just on gut health, but on all things health and wellness. You can go into any Holland & Barrett store across the UK and Ireland and speak to one of our qualified to advise colleagues, or you can actually speak to one of our registered nutritionists as well, who are offering free consultations throughout the month of January.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thanks for your time. It's been really interesting and informative. I'll definitely check it out myself as well. Thanks again and have a fantastic day.
Thanks, Jimmy.
You too.